record straight.
And so I assigned temporarily the duties of the division to Secretary Hackett. That's for the first week. By the end of the week, and I did so in writing, as we were coming out of the week, and I'm getting the weekly report from Secretary Hackett, and seeing the work that was done, and the work that is required, and what she was able to do and not do, and then having had a conversation with the stakeholders for the Tobago October Carnival, this Chief Secretary decided that he will reassign some of the duties from Secretary Hackett to, from Secretary Boris to Secretary Hackett.
The Chief Secretary said he is legally authorized to assign and reassign duties to secretaries within the THA.
I reassigned in writing, not word of mouth, the duties for antiquities and culture to Secretary Hackett, and Secretary Boris remains with the duties for tourism and transportation.
Good morning, Tobago, guys. This morning we jump straight ahead into our conversations, and based on that clip that you just saw, you already know what we're talking about this morning. This morning I have the privilege of sitting in studio and chatting with Councillor Petal, Danielle Benoit, and we are talking, she's a minority councillor in the THA, and we are talking about the reassignment of duties of the Tourism Secretary. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Shenell. Good morning, Tobago, Trinidad and Tobago, and wherever you are tuned in to Tobago Updates this morning. I'm happy to be here. Good morning to you.
Excellent. I'm always careful not to mix you up with the Secretary for Finance. It's a pleasure to see you this morning. This morning we're talking all about what's happening in the Division of Tourism, and we know that Carnival is approaching, and Carnival is one of the big ticket items and one of those things that offer a huge spike in Tobago tourism of recently. You know, we saw that last year, a huge uptick in mostly domestic tourism, but we see a lot of persons flocking to the island. We're at a place where there were extra flights put on, extra sailings, and within 24 hours, completely gone. So that just paints the picture of how high demand this carnival is for persons to get to Tobago, particularly Tobagonians outside of Tobago wanting to come home and be a part of the celebration. And so with this big ticket item on the table, we're seeing a situation where the Chief Secretary now is recognizing that, listen, there's a lot happening here and we want to ensure that this is successful. And so clearly this work is more than one man can handle, and we see some assistance being rendered there by Secretary Zorisha Hackett. Tell us a bit about, what the minority says or minority has to say concerning this, because we heard a lot from Minority Leader Cllr Morris on this particular topic, but we want to hear from you. How are you feeling about this?
So firstly, and that is why there was this public outcry, because we recognize that the October Carnival is approaching, and it is a big ticket item on the calendar, and it also drives great economic activity on the island during that period. So to see this is occurring, and a press release comes out indicating that Assemblyman Hackett has a temporary responsibility for the Division of Tourism, Culture, Antiquities and Transportation. That would have sparked a lot of public conversation. What is really happening? Where is the Secretary of Tourism? October Carnival is approaching. Is she ill? Is she on vacation? What is really going on? And we saw that happening. Then we went to the house, and Secretary of Tourism was in the house. Assemblyman Duke would have raised some questions to the Secretary, the Councillor, and she indicated in no uncertain terms that she still remains Councillor and she is still the Secretary of the division. And that division is Tourism, Culture Antiquities and Transportation. And until she receives further notice, she is still the secretary. Then a day after, which is the 26th, we would have seen a press conference speaking about the October Carnival, and Secretary Hackett.
Was that not the day before?
That was the day after. So plenary happened, and Councillor Boris said that she was still the secretary. And less than 24 hours later, there was a press conference where Assemblyman Hackett was introduced as the secretary with responsibility for culture and antiquities. And again, of course, that would raise public discussion, public outcry. The day before, Councillor Boris said she was still the secretary of the division. Less than 24 hours, we have a situation where Assemblyman Hackett is being announced as secretary with responsibility for culture and antiquities. What is really happening? And of course, the public discussion continued surrounding that matter. Then we saw yesterday the chief secretary coming out in an attempt to bring some clarity to this situation. And he said that it was within his right to reassign duties, and yes, it is within his right. However, what we see is that this reassignment causing some level of confusion, because one, the question remains, is there still a division of tourism, culture, antiquities and transportation? And if there is a division named as such, who is the secretary that is providing general direction and control in keeping with the act over that division? So by separating the duties which he has the right to do, what he has in essence done is removed Councillor Boris as the secretary of the division, providing general direction and control, and would have assigned her as a secretary in the division with responsibilities for tourism and transportation, and also reassigned elements of that division to Assemblyman Hackett with responsibilities for culture and antiquities. And what happens when there is not general direction and control by an individual, which the Act provides for? There are areas within the division that does not necessarily fall within culture and antiquities or transportation and tourism. Take, for instance, the HR department. Take, for instance, the accounting department. There are persons there on contract. When contract comes for renewal, who is providing that general direction and control? Who will be the one that will be reviewing and signing off the contracts of this person in the event that there is some incident that would occur that may need some action in relation to the division of a whole? Who is the one that is providing that general direction and control over the division? And we have already seen where the lines have become blurred, because in that said press conference on Friday, we heard Assemblyman Hackett speak to the fact that she has been, on the beckoning of the Chief Secretary, she has been speaking to the Minister of Transport and speaking to the Minister of Public Utilities in relation to increase flights to Tobago. Granted that that is a part of the activity in getting people to the island, but it is also a transportation issue. So is Secretary Boris responsible for transportation? And you can see where the confusion can occur because of this reassignment.
Understood. When I think about what I listened to in the Chief Secretary's press conference and the conversations that are being had, I think about a situation where Councillor Tashia Boris is still in charge of the division with assistance particularly centered around Carnival from Secretary Hackett. And with the Chief Secretary clarifying that this is only temporary, I expect that after Carnival, things should go back to normal. But what you're saying as it pertains to transportation and all of these things, kind of blurring the lines between who is responsible for what. That's understandable, but as you also indicated, when it comes to Carnival, that is a huge part of ensuring the success of the overall activities. Now, you highlighted something as it pertains to the HR and accounting units and contracts coming to the secretary. In a situation like that, I would believe that the secretary, Boris, would continue,
and it's a presumption
that she continues to sign off on these things, and Secretary Hackett is here assisting with Carnival. Now, when it comes to the communication, this is where I believe that a lot of stuff fell down, because had this situation been made clear from the beginning, it would have avoided a lot of conflict and confusion that you're saying is in the minds of people. So I think that the biggest issue that we're seeing here is an issue of effective communication.
And I agree with you, Shenell, because what should have been done first was actually done last, and we should not have waited for the public to start speculating about what is really happening in the division before communication was made to the public, because the initial press release was very vague. Secretary Hackett is now temporarily reassigned to the division and also keeping the responsibilities of the Division of Education. And the Division of Education is also a very huge division. And the Chief Secretary would have indicated that, we had a successful school reopening. But if you speak to principals and teachers in the various schools throughout Tobago, and you also speak to tutor, they actually have a different story in relation to the opening of schools. Because on the first day, we would have seen some schools had issues in terms of reopening. Even up to last week, there are persons who, at a particular secondary school, had to come together with the teachers and students and parents to repaint their classroom, providing the paint, providing the labor, so that their place of education could be comfortable and suitable. So to me, that does not indicate that all is well also at the Division of Education. And that is another issue that the public has. We have situations where issues also are happening at the Division of Education in relation to school repair and school reopening. And then we are reassigning such a secretary to another division to assist. The Secretary of Education, in our view, also needs some assistance in the Division of Education.
Right. Recently, there was a comment by the minority leader asking whether or not the situation with WASA and the water shortage was a strategic one that undermines the management, the top-level executive management of WASA in Tobago. What are your thoughts about this?
The WASA...
The water shortage issue. Last week I read in the news in 90 seconds that there were comments made about whether or not the water shortage situation in Tobago was something strategic that was set up to basically embarrass.
Strategic by who?
I'm not sure. I also felt that it was a very strange comment to make, because we know that a number of the dams are quite low in Tobago, which has led to that water shortage situation. So there were speculations that there was some sort of political involvement in that.
But political involvement by whom? Well, yesterday the minority leader would have brought the issue. Okay, well, yesterday the minority leader would have brought the issue in relation to the water and the shortage of water on the island. And of course, most people on the island are affected by, you talk to residents throughout the length and breadth of Tobago, and they are affected by the issue in relation to water. I see it as a management issue, because before the general election, we saw some level of predictability with the supply of water. Now, close to 6 months later, we are seeing huge shortages in water. People are complaining about the irregularity of the water supply. So in my view, I see that as a level of lack of or poor management of what is happening. I cannot confirm or deny whether or not, there's some sabotage happening, but I think it's some issue in relation to management, and it may also be some issue in relation to prioritize funding to Tobago in relation to fixing the issues as it relates to water supply.
Understood. And this water supply issue is quite critical for Tobago's development. As you said yesterday in the press conference, the minority leader would have indicated that if this situation is happening during the low season, what will happen during Carnival season?
And he also pointed out the fact that, he was speaking to a visitor, and the visitor indicated that the hotel or where he was staying did not have water, and as a result he was unable to bathe. So again, I agree with that. Just imagine when we have an increase in the number of persons on the island with our water shortage supply, what is going to happen? And it will have an impact, because that will contribute to the experience not being a favorable one to our visitors.
Right. And even as the situation with the transportation to Tobago, particularly for Carnival, what are the conversations that are happening that you're hearing? How are people feeling about that? Because, I've heard comments that now we're hearing this administration singing a different tune about the transportation issue. The transportation issue has been an issue during the PNM administration, and it continues to be an issue. And we heard Secretary Hackett during that press conference highlighting that this still remains an issue, one that conversations are happening surrounding. Hopefully there's relief to that situation. What are some of your thoughts surrounding that?
What is the difference then and now is that when it was an issue under the People's National Movement central government, the cry from this THA administration is that PNM wicked and PNM don't want to give us the airlift, PNM want to sabotage the carnival. But on this occasion, when the UNC is in government, it appears as if they are more empathetic, they are more understanding that no, we understand that there are the issues and we want to talk and we want to collaborate. Where was that talking and the collaboration and having the understanding during the previous administration? And yes, we understand that the airlift has been a problem. We have not gone back fully to the pre-COVID flights. However, the past administration was working and was willing to work along with the Tobago House of Assembly, but there was an antagonistic relationship, particularly coming from the Tobago House of Assembly. Now, all of a sudden, we have a very understanding THA about the issues surrounding Cllr and the number of flights coming to the island, even in terms of the time frame, because that was another issue last year, the time frame with which the flights were added. We don't hear that outcry, we don't hear that same energy, being displayed toward this now UNC-led central government. So that is the disparity.
Understood. Well, we're going to take a quick break right here, and we'll be back with much more on this conversation right after this. See you soon.
It's a brand new morning, rise up
right here on Tobago Updates, guys. Thank you for sticking with us this morning. We're having conversations with Councillor Petal Daniel Benoit, who's the minority councillor in the THA. And this morning, we have been having major conversations on Carnival, the reassignment of secretaries within the Division of Tourism. And we're shifting gears a bit on to budget expectations for Tobago for fiscal 2026. Now, we haven't yet gotten an announcement on the date when that budget would be read, but we know that the Prime Minister did indicate that this would be happening in early October. So all eyes are out for a possible date on October 6th, which is next Monday. But we still haven't heard anything as yet. How are you feeling about us going past that traditional September mark and still not yet having a budget?
It is quite concerning because by now we would have known when the budget will be read. We would have had experiences where the budget would either be read at the end of September, or very early in October. So by now, you, Minister of Finance, would have made an announcement that budget date is such and such and such a date. To date, we have had no such announcements. We would have also seen where very recently, I think was last week, the downgrade by Standard & Poor's of our economy. Then my expectation of the allocation, I don't see it being more than what we would have received in the past, the 4.3% to the 4.5% of the national budget. I am also suggesting, and if we look at the recent past history of this current UNC administration, where at the midterm review, the midterm supplemental would have been more than, this year would have been more than in the past 2 to 3 years. However, we would have seen a reduction in the supplemental allocation to Tobago. It was, $31 million, I think it was. And as a result of that, and if you're going from that experience, I don't foresee that the allocation to Tobago will be anything greater than the allocation of past times. And also, if you're looking to the central government in terms of their prioritization of expenditure in Tobago, we could see what is happening with WASA and the whole issue of water shortage. In the past, again, we would have seen where under a former PNM government, under a former minister, WASA, the expenditure and the funds that were spent in Tobago in relation to water supply surpass other administrations. We see the desilting of the Hillsborough Dam. We saw the drilling of wells. We saw the installation of boosters all around Tobago. And that was the investment because that administration would have prioritized water on the island. We are seeing the reverse of that happening. So again, if we look at what has been happening and the trends in the recent past since this government would have come into power, I don't have any great expectations in terms of the allocation.
Right. I mean, historically, we have run a deficit budget,
yes,
and we don't expect anything different this time around. But this time, the THA would have requested a 3.71 billion, and that was just projected off of the 63.5 billion that they are expecting the government to come with. You said that you don't expect them to get that. But when you have a situation where the government removes some of those revenue generating streams, like the property tax, do you expect them to even be able to meet that 63.5 billion that the THA anticipates the national budget to be?
But it will be quite difficult, and it will be interesting to see what will be the revenue streams highlighted in this upcoming budget, because as you rightly said, we don't have the property tax again, which would have been a major revenue stream contributing towards the reduction of the deficit. There were some other taxes that were removed, but we have not seen any introduction or any new revenue streams coming on board. So it will be very interesting to see what will be the new innovative revenue generating proposals that will come forward in the budget. And I want citizens to pay attention to what is happening, because if we don't have new revenue streams or increased revenue, it means that there may be a reduction in terms of expenditure. What are those expenditure items that may be cut from the budget? We already see that the CPEP is no longer, that project would have been dismantled. We also saw where a number of URP workers were sent home. So I want members of the public to pay particular attention to what will happen and what will be cut coming out of this budget.
What are some key areas you believe should be focused on as it pertains to Tobago's allocation from the central government?
Well, in terms of Tobago, our priority areas generally tourism, agriculture, and those are some areas that I think focus should be spent. Also, in terms of expenditure by the central government in Tobago, which was another focal area, expenditure on the utilities, water, tea and tech, those types of things. Are also what is happening with the airport. The opening of the terminal building, International A&R Robinson Airport, that we also want to see that as a priority. So education, tourism, agriculture, youth and sport, those are some priority areas that I hope will be placed in the budget coming.
And even with some of the development that we've seen from this administration recently, we saw the launch or the opening of that new road between that Shervan connector to Storby. Are you pleased with these developments, specifically as it pertains to the very same airport situation and alleviating traffic in that Milford Road area?
And we welcome development to Tobago, and the minority supports what is good for Tobago. What we do not support, however, is how things are done and the process that is undertaken to achieve certain types of development. One thing that was promised, and I just want to take our viewers' minds back, because with the airport expansion, this road that was recently opened was a part of the airport expansion. The road should have been a dual carriage road, meaning 2 lanes up, 2 lanes down. And the central government, a part of the airport expansion, was fitting the expenditure for that road. We have heard from this administration that there's an issue in terms of money, there's a lack of funding. And the question was, if the central government was willing to expend on this road, why are we taking the limited resources of the Tobago House of Assembly to build or construct the road? The other issue was in relation to the procurement of the road, because we heard several things in the public domain as it relates to the process for selection of the particular contractor. And in the midst of all of that, we had issues in terms of who would have filed injunction because the road was passing on their lands. So it was mired with a lot of confusion and conflict, which again increased the cost of the construction of the road. So that is our issue. Our issue is the process and the way how things are done. It was not done in a transparent, it was not done in a way that would provide value for money for taxpayers, particularly seeing that there's an issue with shortage of funds as being complained by this administration.
Understood. But we know development doesn't come without a shortage of pushback. Even when there was that acquiring the land for the airport under the very PNM administration, there was a lot of pushback from persons. There were a number of court cases raised as it pertains to acquiring that land. But I remember having a conversation a couple of weeks ago with the Secretary for Infrastructure, Secretary James, and he indicated that during that conversation as it pertains to that dual carriage road leading up to the airport, because that's the question I raised, why didn't we go with the central government suggestion? And during those conversations that happened with the Minister for Works and Transportation at the time, they indicated that though that was a part of the plan, it was not a priority for the next 5 years for Tobago. And then the THA decided that because they saw this to be a need, particularly under this administration, they went ahead and built that road. When it comes to development throughout Tobago and making that investment to ensure that the lives of Tobagonians are easier, or we have an increased standard of living, do you believe that Tobago at times would have to go ahead and make the tough decision to bite the bullet and spend the money to make Tobagonians comfortable and move development forward, as opposed to continuing to wait for someone at the central government level to say, okay, well, we think Tobagonians can wait the next 5 years for a road, or they deserve to have this now?
No, I do agree that the Tobago House of Assembly has to determine its priorities, and it's all about collaboration and cooperation. However, you are complaining about lack of funding, and there are. So I spoke about the process earlier, right? So you would have spent on this road, but who would have really benefited in terms of economic activity? Another issue that arose in relation to the road is the spiriting away, as the secretary called it back then, the spiriting away of contracts to persons who are not Tobagonians. We saw a video recently circulating on Facebook where in a community works were being done. However, no one from the community was involved in the works. I am not sure if the works were a Tobago House of Assembly works, WASA, or whatever. But the point I am making is a contract was issued to someone who was not a Tobago contractor. And you are hearing the cries from a number of the Tobago contractors that they have not been given quote-unquote work by this administration. And as a result, the multiplier effect of the funding circulating in the Tobago economy has gone away. Because if we would have hired a Tobago contractor, that Tobago contractor would have hired Tobagonians, residents from the community. And everywhere you walk, you hear the cry of lack of opportunities, particularly lack of job opportunities. We saw where contractors in Tobago had to send home thousands of persons because they are not being engaged by the THA to do meaningful, substantial work. So it has to go hand in hand. We also seeing where this road is built, but the normal road that we traverse on daily is in utter disrepair. The minority leader would have highlighted that road opposite or by cost cutters. There are a number of roads in Tobago that right now they seem to be impassable. That affects the daily lives of Tobagonians, but no priority is placed there. We are just asking the administration to really prioritize Tobagonians, put Tobago at the forefront, but it appears right now like Tobago is last.
Understood. We're going to take a quick break right here, and we'll be back with much more conversation right after this. See you soon.